Looks like we're running. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 17th of August, 2026 in the What the F is Going On in the World department. But, got to make the best of it. And, of course, our cute little website that has all sorts of freebie stuff and share alike. Sorry being a little bit late today. It's been a kind of busy weekend. I brought some of the material that had been packed up into the car from our previous fire season that was going on. I haven't unpacked anything, leaving it tucked away, but nonetheless, in a situation where, okay, maybe we're past our macaronis. Anyway, as you know, we are proceeding through the exciting world of Dwayne Gish Old and Dwayne Gish Not Quite So Old, the 1978 and 1995 Gish books, Evolution, The Fossils Say No, and Still Say No, at least according to dear sweet Dwayne Gish, a book that lacks reference bibliography, has a modicum of indexing, but so at least it's got that. Has footnotes. What do you know? What's been cited? Hello, Lisa. You wouldn't, and that's why you compile a reference bibliography. And so I'm looking into what sources has dear old Dwayne Gish brought up, and B, how much gets carried over into the 1995 book, and see how much new gets added on between 1978 and 1995 and what's been fiddling on about stuff. So we finished our chapter 1 last episode, and which was kind of a general introductory grumpy cat about evolution being philosophical naturalism, blah, 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 and trying to cement up the young earth creationism is the only biblically correct version without go too overboard on it. Because Gish was aiming at regular stuff. Oh, you hear about Big Bend National Park? No. What has been going on with, I think, hasn't there been something where the Trump administration is trying to put those little highway things in for the Border Patrol with no purpose in mind, and somebody got a no-bid contract on it, and it's going to be useless and troublesome, and in fact, in the long term, is probably going to help anybody coming in to the country illegally because it gives them nice, convenient roads. That Big Bend, if the ones that I'm thinking of. Chalk that up with the people trying to jump overboard at the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, and the Strait of Hormuz that is or is not still open, and our tariffs that are just making everybody hold their breath, and companies slowing down and all that. It's don't blame me. I voted Harris. We warned you this was going to happen. All of us people on the non-Trump side, we're telling you the guy has no brakes. And he's going to go berserk and do crazy things and waste money and make himself richer and raised at all the golden plated crap. He's literally been gilding statues all over Washington, D.C. He's got a gold fetish that makes Goldfinger seem bland. I think he thinks himself as Midas. He's desperate, knowing that this is his last term in office, unless he decides to be unconstitutional and stay on later. To the despair of J.D. Vance, who I'm sure is salivating at the prospect of being his successor, that stamp Trump on the nation to make it inevitable and permanent, so that you will always have to stare at everything that Mr. Trump ever did, was to put all of this crap up in Washington, D.C. that you can't tear down. Well, I'm terribly sorry, but we can tear them down. And in fact, I would absolutely advocate eradicating every single bit. There are certainly people who are just ready at the bit to remove his name from everything he's stuck his name on to, including the Kennedy Center. But I would include the bloody ballroom. And if he builds his stupid arch, tear that down too, and haul every bit of the debris down to his properties and dump them on the front yard, because they're vandalism. They was never given permission to do it. He's just jiggery pokery things. So I don't care whether even some of them might have been halfway's good idea. Just because he built them, they all got to go. And we have to restore the White House to what it was prior to his vandalism. So there we go. Money laundering, absolutely. And certainly the people around him are doing that. There was always some accusations that some of his shadier property deal that was involving Russian investors and the like were doing money laundering. The Saudis were doing a little bit of schmoozing with how they were maintaining suites at his hotels in Washington, his hotel in Washington, D.C., at great expense just to funnel some money into him. There's a kind of a pay for play thing that you contribute to some little foundation that connects up to the Trump family, and then suddenly you've got a no bid contract. There's going to be investigations up the yin yang on this. I mean, the Tweed ring and the Pendergast regime in Missouri and all that were rank amateurs. People in Philadelphia and Chicago back in the day. Al Capone was a rank amateur in this department compared to the Trump administration. And they're making no attempts to hide it, and their sheer brazenness about it. Meanwhile, regular people are hurting, and they're going to continue to hurt, and they're going to get worse and worse and worse as we go along. And eventually some people's annoyance will boil over, including even maybe some of the nitwits that Trump pardoned after January 6th. I mean, if they're willing to march to the Capitol, infuriated by a lie, just how furious can they get with something that's actually truthful and screwing them? So anyway, that starts off with a happy note. Yeah. And of course, Trump is still acting as if nothing's ever his fault. I haven't actually ended inflation, but it's getting better, and I don't care, and move on. He's acting as if he's perpetually on day one, and he's not been in office for 2 years. And that absolute pathetic wretches in the House and Senate that call themselves Republicans that have been rubber stamping him. The House has now gone off for its recess for a couple of months. Oh, what can go wrong in the next couple of months? So going to have the most anticipated obituary in history. That's another point, is I would absolutely scream bloody murder if, when he eventually dies, he must never be permitted to have a lying in state in the Capitol building, simply because as he's been lying in state, lying constantly during his entire political career, so he has no business doing that. But anyway, that's farther down the road. I want him to reach a terrible state of despair, living a very long life, sinking into an oblivion that is his worst nightmare of being called Herbert Hoover and Jimmy Carter Iran crisis on steroids. So we'll find out where things are going. Back to the mere joys of Duane Gish and science. So we're now entering into a chapter, and it's a relatively short one, about microorganisms to fish. And this is a historical enterprise in part because we have to kind of explain where the world of science was back when Gish was doing the 1978 book versus where things had moved on by the 1995 book, whereas what we understand to be the case in 2026. And to see how things have compared in relation to creationism being able to explain things versus the regular science. Gish comes up with a very small, we'll be dealing with some of these in this episode, but the entire chapter has only 13 sources. It's really sparse. They are legitimately technical papers and a couple books. Two of them are riffing off of George Gaylord Simpson. It's his 1949 book, just a single page, 18, that he nicked for some authority quoting. And that's available at archive.org, so you can look at it there. And then an article from the 1960 book, Evolution After Darwin, also available at archive.org. That's just page 143. Incidentally, that reference got dropped from the 1995 Gish. Is it possible that it was not comfortable enough to try to get Simpson from 1960 on the ground, when instead he would prefer to drag in 1949 Simpson on the development? Because remember, Simpson is a vertebrate-ologist, and so he's not necessarily in his depth field, but he was summing things up legitimately, as are the other sources that will be showing down the line, which are present 73. Alas, I get you the first page of this little puppy, but fortunately, that's the only page Gish referenced. The title, and Gish, one of the things that just fascinates me about of Gish's footnoting is that he's only listing the reference very bleak geology volume, so nothing about the title or anything. But anyway, this one is Pseudofossils, a plea for caution. So that's what the topic is about. And then he gets a bit from Axelrod in a science article from 1958. Holy moly. Early Cambrian marine fauna. So that's what that one was actually about. There he has his longest authority quote. So he is trawling back to 1958 about somebody how there are no fossils found relating to how the Cambrian is coming through. And that's partially true. But the question is, why is it? Which is Canadian right now. Yeah. Well, I'm stuck in America. I'm a proud American, a Trumpista. I have a functioning brain stem. But nonetheless, I feel that the majority of Americans are not people who voted in Mr. Trump. Many people stayed out in the 2024 election, and so they have the onus on them. Thank you very much. Anyhow, the Preston Cloud thing he retained, and he gave a almost quotation on it. He he put text in there and then footnoted it, but the important thing is how he reworded it. And so the original material that's in Preston Cloud is at, quote, as yet no unequivocal metazoa in rocks of indisputable Proterozoic or older age, unquote. Gish changed that Proterozoic to Precambrian, and that's not quite the same thing. And that's because literally in the very next paragraph that Cloud was talking about, he switched on to, it's right in that middle column in there, and you'll be able to see that when you check out the original science thing. I'll be putting a link up to that preview first page, so you'll be able to see it. He's talking about Bunyerichnus to be basal Paleozoic Ediacaran, unquote. So clearly by Cloud's time in the 1970s, they were recognizing that these Ediacaran biota were going on before the Cambrian, and that there were clearly metazoans, multicellular organisms that were existing in this Ediacaran period, and that when he's talking about the Proterozoic or older having nothing on the metazoa, he's talking about before that period. So when we're still talking about is like 650, 700 million years, we've actually pushed some of the numbers around. In Preston Cloud's time, I think they were pushing the Cambrian back farther than what we've having, that the Cambrian has been pulled down from about 600 million years to about 550, and even shorter. The current numbers are, of course, in the rocks where they're volume 1. We have the geologic charts and the time frames and stuff, so nobody has to take the word for it. You can just draw off the basic things to show when each one of these little zones is coming on. Anyway, now that particular trace fossil I had never heard of, Bunyerichnus. In fact, there's not a hell of a lot on it. It doesn't even have a regular Wikipedia page, but it is in fact a trace fossil, little wiggly little thing, which looks like it was probably like a biomat fragment. Anyway, there's a 2021 paper on it about the Australian Ediacaran and earlier period. In fact, it's on was the Amadeus Basin of Central Australia a crucible for pre-Ediacaran macrobiotic evolutionary trials. And so basically it's a breakdown of the various fossil material that is in that pre-Ediacaran period in Australia, which ones of them are likely misidentified fossils versus other things, that suggesting interesting things are going on with little critters that are wiggly things and maybe moving and other stuff that's not easily placed within the extant structure of stuff because they're much too fragmentary. Virtually none of these things are wackadoodle Lagerstätten kinds of things. And that brings up our cute little fossil structure. But first, I do want to mention that the Ediacaran topic as such only comes up in the 1995 Gish, and we'll be encountering more on that when we get down to those pages where he's coming into all of that. Oh, the Mud Fossil University. Oh, I do know about that whole mud fossil claims of the people who think that there was a ginormous cataclysmic flood like in 100 years ago that caused global amnesia and destroyed a super ancient civilization that looks like the Eiffel Tower and stuff. And it's just absolute wackadoodle stuff, if that's the one that we're talking about. I know Flint Dibble and Mini Minute Man, Milo Rossi, and others have just gone, woo, like you can't believe this shit. And even I couldn't. I mean, this is a relatively recent crazy train thing that's popped up on the internet, if that's what we're talking about, the mud fossil stuff. Putting on tariffs in a number of Canadian provinces, including hockey sticks. Yes, Vesta. Yeah, Trump is using tariffs not for economics, but for politics. If he doesn't like you, if you say bad things about him, or you decide to not support his idiotic war in Iran, suddenly he's going to be slapping stuff on you. The regime in Brazil that switched away from Bolsonaro and has been putting him in jail for fraud and trying to take over the government. Trump doesn't like that. And so he's put on tariffs, even though we have a trade surplus with Brazil. It's absolutely crazy train stuff. And that's what happens when you have a demented old man. And I mean, literally a prefrontal dementia old man. It's only the next couple of years. And the problem is that a person like that who can get so petulant and affronted and do crazy things, it's only where you can't tell where he's going to go. It's a channel by conspiracy theorists. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's about the whole thing about this cataclysm that requires that you not know. And I strongly recommend checking out the Mini Minute Man stuff on it because and probably Google either Milo Rossi and Mud Fossil or Flint Dibble stuff, because it's just breathtaking, the sheer audacious stupidity of this idea. It's something that shoots past flat Earth. I thought flat Earth kind of had this thing staked out, and the people who thinks that there were giant rock formations that were actually fossilized people. That's another little thing that's been flitting around in the crazy train groups. Now, how many people actually believe all of this is hard to tell. You can't really go by how many clicks and views the videos can get, because some of these people would be viewed by people who are going, what? And so that's adding to their viewership. But nevertheless, we can assume that a number that is beyond zero are actually taking this seriously. And these people are knocking around at the level, all we need is Candace Owens or something like that to pick it up, and then it can get into the political environment, because we know edges of anti-evolutionism, dinosaurs are fake. Candace Owens is on that thing. These things can funnel, therefore, into the edges of the Trump administration that way. And that would have been impossible back in the days when Republicans weren't effing morons. So if Alberta and Saskatchewan wanted competent leadership, they would put export taxes on Alberta heavy crude and Sask. Oh, yeah, well, they may end up doing that. Trump seems to still not get the degree to which many of our vital industries and fuel needs in the Northeast are contingent upon connections to Canada. But of course, Mr. Trump doesn't get out much. He lives in a little insular bubble, surrounded. He lives in Florida and moves from one gold palace apartment golf course to another, which he owns. So he doesn't get out mentally or physically. And that's not a good thing for a president to do. Don't blame me. I voted for Harris. Anyway, back to there's a long quote which he pulls from the Axelrod paper. And it's all about how that there are no fossils found in them and so forth and so on, which is perfectly fine and dandy for 1958. 1978, and it's more anachronistic now. So the fact that he was still sticking with that, he got rid of an italics in the 95 version, but he was highlighting no fossils found at all, but still he was using the same quote. Now, what's the interesting background context? Is Cambrian chordates. He's talking about Cambrian fauna, and the most obvious example would be chordates, because we are chordates, and therefore that is our origin. Question: What do Cambrian chordates look like? Are they lions and tigers and bears, oh my? No. Are they fish with backbones and jaws? No. They're wiggly little things that look about like that, like Pacaya and Haikuella and all of that. They are little ripply things along the sides. They have the inklings of a notochord, so they're at the base of the whole chordate thing. So now, and those are found only in the Lagerstätten from the Cambrian. So remember the fancy little word, and I'll even type that in there too, so anybody who is anal retentive about texts can see that. Lagerstätten, which is an old German word with an umlaut, that is a fancy term that's used in the literature to describe geologic deposits, paleontological deposits that preserve things in just spectacular detail. And there's varying reasons how that comes about. Anoxic conditions and certain kind of ocean chemistry things, because the Cambrian has like 3 major Lagerstätten, Sirius and Burgess Shale and Shangjiang over in China, and all functionally equatorial at the time, even though they're not equatorial now. They're all way up in the northern hemisphere because of that continental drift stuff that's been moving everything around. And so all of that paleomagnetism data and all of that's more problems for creationism, but we're not even bothering about that part. The whole point is that if you remove those Lagerstätten from the equation, what do you got? You got trilobites, because they have hard shells. So you can know that there's the age of trilobites, but virtually everything that's been really, really easy. Yes, Roger is batshit crazy. Pedophilia is one heck of a drug. Yes. Yeah. The critters that are soft-bodied are invisible if you don't have Lagerstätten. And we know that, not as an opinion, but as an observation, because they are not showing up in any other. We have trilobite fossils from Washington State. We've got Cambrian fossils in a variety of contexts, but if it ain't a Lagerstätten, it's not going to be these soft-bodied critters. Now, that includes the biggest predator that we know of at the moment in the Cambrian, which is an Omalocaris, which is about 3 feet or more across that period. Just this monster, because, you know, Morella, which were immensely one of the most popular little critters in a section of the Burgess Shale, is about the size of your pinky fingernail. I've seen them up at Drumheller and the museum, the Royal Tyrrell Museum up there in Canada that I visited, Alberta, since that is just suddenly discussed by Vesta earlier. So that brings us home, call back. That if you don't have Lagerstätten prior to the Cambrian, then a lot can be going on. Critters of all sorts, ancestors of all sorts could be there, and we would not be able to be sure about what they were, Lagerstätten, to be able to preserve them in detail. So what would, that's question number 1, is the fossil preservation element. This is the thing that I've described in relation to Duane Gish, specifically the Bermuda Triangle defense, which is if you bring up the absence or not of fossils without discussing the geologic reason for them, you are in exactly the same boat as people who believe in the Bermuda Triangle, who talk about the mysterious ship disappearance while failing to mention that the worst hurricane in 40 years went through the neighborhood on the night the ship mysteriously disappeared, the yacht. So you think that might have had something to do with the disappearance? That kind of a thing. So you got your Pacaya and Haikuella and others that are known to be in the Cambrian, because we have the Lagerstätten. What would an ancestor of that look like? How big would it be? We know that the evolutionary community, certainly by the time of the 70s, definitely in the 19th version that I've got in paperback, and therefore before doing Gish, and we'll find out whether or not, I think he saw some Barbara Stahl stuff farther down the road. We'll find out as we plow through the source. That's why it's nice to have a reference bibliography. I could just look it up, the reference in the bibliography, to find out what he'd been citing, but we don't get that. So anyway, by the time of Barbara Stahl, evolutionary biologists, and you would throw in Valentine as well in a later period. He's writing around 2004 in his Origins of Phyla. They're thinking in terms that an ancestor of chordates would look a lot like the lamprey larva, and Pikaia is damn close to that to begin with. That are even smaller, maybe a quarter of an inch long or so, or maybe even smaller yet, that could be an evolutionary ancestor. These have no chance whatsoever of being preserved outside of a lager state. Now, is there reason to believe that things were going on independent, that it's not a guess that if you had a lager state and you would be seeing more things? Are there indications from what we do find that we're missing something that a lager state would be able to catch? And the answer is yes. And that's where another little sidebar, the small shelly fauna, come in. Those are cute little bitsies. They are actually just called this, the small shelly fauna. And again, I saw some examples for real up at the Drumheller Museum. They're little teeny things that look largely like little ice cream cones and stuff. They're little shells, about maybe 1/8 of an inch across, maybe some a little bigger, some a little smaller. Tiny, tiny little things. Shells, there's just a ton of them. When do we find them? Almost entirely in the earliest Cambrian, millions of years before the big Cambrian explosion part. They're gone from the scene pretty much by the time you hit the big Cambrian explosion. Whatever was going on with these things disappeared. Are they the ancestors of what? Well, it's suspected, and it's really hard to tell what was inside these itty-bitty little things, but they may very well be, at least some of them, early mollusks. And later on, you get into things where what's going on with maybe ammonites and nautiloids and various other things that are going on later on that we see in the big Cambrian, millions of years later, size differentials and all that stuff. That's another issue. Verify enormously if we had the genomes of ammonites and the genomes of whatever it is that's living inside of the small shelly fauna. And I keep on saying if we knew what was inside, because nothing that's inside these shells have been preserved. An organism was making these shells, and we don't know what they are. Why? Because they're not in a lager state in context. That's element number one. Two, we've got something else that definitely goes back to the Ediacaran period, and indeed they survive well down into the Cambrian explosion part, and that's Claudina. These little thingies are about maybe like yay big or so, little teeny cylindrical shell elements. And one thing very interesting about it, a hell of a lot of them are found with bore holes in the side. Is it possible that the organism itself maybe had poisonous tentacles sticking out the top that was feeding or whatever? Whatever was inside, is it related to anything that exists today? We don't know. Nothing has ever been preserved from the inside. But apparently something, an organism for which also we do not know what they are, possibly a thing that was entirely soft-bodied, was trying to munch on whatever was inside and is boring holes into them. Which then brings us to the bigger question. Small shelly fauna, Claudina, critters with shells. Why do you have a shell? Well, you have a shell if lacking a shell makes you dinner. So it is highly likely that from the small shelly fauna at least on, and even going back earlier with Claudina, that there is an increasing amount of multicellular organism predation going on, the details of which and the critters of which we cannot tell. Why? Because there's no lagerstätten. And that is the background context that Duane Gish in 1978 and Duane Gish in 1995 never gets within 8,000 miles of dealing with, even though he's also bumping into in the 95 book, because later on in the chapter, he's alluding to Wonderful Life from Stephen Jay Gould. And that functionally is bringing up things relative to all of these issues, all the data he would need to realize that there's more going on here and you need to deal with this stuff would be available just from that book, from the mid-1980s. So what we're dealing with then with Gish is, surprise, surprise, a ginormous shell game of playing authority quotes, whittling things down to where he can play around with stuff to make an impression that there's a mystery there, but not explaining the context of why there might be a mystery. And of course, as you'll find out when you read that Plummer paper in 2021, that holy smokes, has the field moved on from there to where we're finding more and more of the ancestral forms of things going into the Ediacaran period and the developmental biology that's been developed in the new book that we're doing, Rocks Are There, Volume 2. We're going to be breaking down the very extensive literature that's been developed, working through the various genetic systems that are found in more complex organisms like us chordates, and the stages in which these things were developing in the Precambrian period. It's reasonable to think that the vast majority of the genetic systems that are leading to the Cambrian explosion, including homeobox genes, are occurring way before then in organisms that are tiny and doing little things around the periphery of this Ediacaran forest world that was a major dynamic ecosystem that ran for 50, 60 million years and then fell apart as the Ice Age snowball Earth started breaking down, and you shifted over into a different dynamic that eventually leads to a big drop-off in stuff. There's like a big a dearth of fossils completely, and then the small shelly fauna running amok. And then way down the road, we're talking about a process of 20, 30 million years from start to stop. We're starting to see the big splashy Cambrian explosion stuff that we're catching in those Lagerstätten in the middle and late Cambrian. And when you put that chronological perspective together, you can see objectively that the creationist world of Gish, Henry Morris, and all that crowd back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s has been absolutely useless. And toss in the intelligent design movement. Because as we'll also be discussing in the new book, for obtuseness squared, it's hard to beat Gunter Beckley, the late Gunter Beckley, and his blither blathering on nitpicking everything up and down the yin yang to try to get distancing that Precambrian environment and the structures there and the organisms that are popping up in the Cambrian part. So, we've got all the way to half an hour. We've made it 30 minutes in. Let me put my little thank you note for our people who have stuck with us up and down, in and out through and I get that little thing up, and then I can change my window. Come on, little mouse, move around, move around, move around. There we go. And a ye old screen share. There we go. Plop. Thank you, everybody who has helped out or continues to help out. Colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, friends. Everybody has had their ups and downs. Some people have had health issues. Some over the years have died. I've outlived quite a few people in this area. And people come in and out as the case may be. But we're scraping along day by day, week by week. A little trickle of book royalties come in every month, and all of that keeps us going. We are busy beavers, and we will continue to be busy beavers until we are prevented from doing anything else. So this gives an excellent opportunity to switch on to part 2. This one popped up because of good old CMI, Creation Ministries International, which is the divorced half of Answers in Genesis that materialized. So they've been around 20 years ago that this happened. And they were highlighting, supposedly updated on the 29th of June, 2026, this little puppy here. And I'll be putting a link up to that so you can follow along. In fact, I'll give you a brief look at that. That's page number 1. And then there's some things on in here. Then page number 2. Boom, boom, boom. It's not terribly long. And then page number 3. And you will notice at the bottom, there ain't no footnotes. This is not, well, other than one that says, the rocks consist of gray wacca, a hard, poorly assorted sandstone, mudstone, and slate, a metamorphic rock. That's their footnote. This article is actually from 2008. So they're thinking, ooh, let's put this up. And it's Tas Walker offering stuff on some geologic features down in Australia, including the Wallamambi Gorge and its waterfall that he claims only makes sense as having been formed in the flood. And so I was going, well, let's look up some geology about that. And that was not an easy task. That it's entirely likely that what geological work has been done on the subject is not under that name, that it's under whatever feature or deposit or structure that it's under. And I didn't have the gumption to hunt too much farther on it. But I did find a very nice discussion, Geology of the Macleay Valley, which is designed for school teaching there at weebly.com, which explain, quote, the age and extent of coastal barrier formation reflects sea level rise from the past to present. Around 125,000 years ago, the sea level was 5 meters higher than it is now, and much of the coast was underwater. The last glacial period, between 25,000 and 15,000 years ago, saw sea levels drop around 110 to 130 meters below their present level as available water was trapped as ice. After this, sea levels rose rapidly and reached the present level around 6,500 years ago. And therefore, well, there was an unquote on the 6,500 years ago. So this is slightly before the creation of the earth in young earth creationist dogma. But it's not unreasonable then. What you've got is a landscape that is either being covered by ice or uncovered, and sea levels are dropping and increasing. And so now you're ending with things where the drainage system is now sliding down through erosion elements that produce things like the Wallambi Gorge and its waterfall in Australia as a relatively recent phenomenon compared to the big scale thing of the last 125,000 years. Now, it would have been funky fun if Walker had wanted to take on any of that geology and explain exactly how this thing could possibly have originated in the flood and compare it to the technical literature and show that he can outperform that technical literature if he was available on it. But he didn't cite anything. I couldn't find a hell of a lot other than this little bit in here. I suspect that there is detailed geological material on this, but again, not under those terminology. Now, this reminds us again, frequently creationists will deck stack and slide around an issue by the terminology they use. For example, polystrate fossils and things like that, that they are using a term that is not what would be used in the regular scientific literature, and therefore anybody Googling that is going to get the creationist spin, not the regular scientific material. And this partly may be exactly the thing. He's not describing the detailed geologic structures of this stuff so that you'd be able to track any of that down. Videos from creationists end up on my YouTube homepage. Oh, well, there's an awful lot of stuff that gets dumped in place. The algorithms watch around. It's entirely possible that you're watching this show could be feeding into the algorithm, and it's on the topic of evolution creation, and therefore it's thinking, ooh, well, and they'll bring in material. I will be looking at topics and on even things that I've shopped online about and things, or looked up on for background material, and then I'll be getting sidebars from their stupid little algorithm. So YouTube knows when you've been sleeping. It knows when you've been awake. It's like the long arm of the unsleeping eye of YouTube, ever there to develop clickbait, to suck in your viewership, and so forth and so on. I'm very selective about the kinds of things that I'm dealing with. There's scads of material on, religion debates, and amazingly enough, not a huge amount of creationist material pops up. I tend to get some other sidebar stuff on some geology and others, but generally speaking, when you start homing in on a particular topic thing, you'll suddenly have a bunch of crap coming up that relate to it, that think, so do you want this or not? You get the same dynamic in the stuff that pops up on Facebook, Meta. Yeah, I guess it's still Facebook, just like it's still Twitter, not X. In fact, what else could you call it? Nobody says I'm Xing, so they would still say I'm tweeting. And so why not just keep calling it Twitter? I do. Yeah. Plus, it would probably annoy the God King acolyte Elon Musk. So yep, it's Twitter. I'm going to call it Twitter. Never going to call it X. So anyway, this little funky little thing will be occasionally I'm popping up on these little sidebars that are illustrative of the weird superficiality. Remember this 2008 article, that's a long time ago. And the fact that whatever update they were doing, maybe they changed the linkages or something in the text. But in terms of its content, it's still stuck in 2008 and superficial even at 2008 standards. So there it is. Okay. So let's put up our cute little commercial for Rocks for There. Open up. And screen share. Mm-hmm. Still, it's gone down to 83 degrees in the den. Isn't that nippy? Yes, it's been in the 80s, 90s. Our smoke circumstance has gotten better, but there have been occasional days for the last week where smoke from fires in the region have got blown in the westerlies that are dropping in to our area. And our spate is just a spectacular temperature inversion. And so it traps crap all the time. So frequently late at night, when I would like to keep the doors open, I can't because the smoke has gotten so icky. Even though there were no immediate fires in our local neighborhood, it's just stuff that we've got imported from the winds blowing in from the pollution down in that area. Anyway, commercial. Yes, dummy name is Kid X. Yes, yes. Elon Musk will be, like Donald Trump, will be the subject of a great many psychological PhD treatises and sociological ones in decades to come, trying to figure out what the hell was going on with this guy. Anyway, for those who have volume 1 of The Rocks Were There, wait till you see volume 2. It's going to be even more jam-packed with material. In fact, I had to revise the cosmology chapter because there was a brand new paper that popped up just this week on a finding of a black hole star, which is the latest little thing that had been thought of for very early in the universe from 660 million years after the Big Bang. That is one of the little red dots that are these mystery objects very, very far away. This one's like 13 billion light years. 13 billion years old stuff. And when you, again, put everything in the order that you're seeing these things relate to, you can see that the earliest universe is got globby galaxies and a lot of black holes and a lot of funky things going on, but the kind of well-organized spiral galaxies with the kinds of arms that we're looking at and the more detailed stuff, those come later and hundreds of millions of years later. And in case billions of years later. And you will find that invariably Jason Lisle and these various other people, Jason Lisle is still being trotted out by Will Duffy in his ongoing ping pong match with Gutsick Gibbon Erica on evolution information, that he was just bringing up Jason Lisle's correct prediction about the early galaxy and stuff and stars from the James Webb. Sorry, that's a representation. And when you look at the details, it's not fitting what he was claiming at all. And that's going to be discussed in the cosmology chapter in Rocks Were There, volume 2. So there's going to be oodles and oodles of juicy material and some juicy charts including our breakdown of the arc encounter, which is another, for scholars, this will be the first place that you'll have the whole skivvy about the structure of their material, and we'll have material on those kind of organisms that they're not thinking about, which should they have been on the ark, including all these weird little diseases, where did all that come from? So there's an awful lot of useful material and recent technical literature that will be, again, as we did with the first book, where we were including stuff practically up to the publication date of it back in 2020. We're doing exactly the same thing on this. And cross fingers, we should be out before Christmas, hopefully, maybe even earlier. We'll see. We've got Jackson's finished his main draft of his last chapter, and I've still got to do the arc encounter thing, and I'm also squeezing the material that verbose me has written an awful lot of from first 4 chapters, really. That's got to be tightened up a bit to get it within the page structure, because there is a physical limit as to how big the books can be, and Rocks Were There Volume 1 was pushing up against that boundary, so that gives me a framework to figure out how I'm going to trim everything down. Oh, terrible, Lisa. I hope you're laid up still in the hospital or recuperating. And yikes, that's stay cool and calm at all of that. I fortunately have never had to have super duper serious injuries. I had my one hospital stay back 22 years ago. When I dropped a metal plate on my foot when I was working, they had to take me to a emergency for them to find out that I'd actually broken my foot, because my pain threshold is such that I was just thinking, oh, that feels like a sprain. Yeah. But, they were concerned enough to realize, and it was in fact broken. I got a little metal plate they had to put in my foot to compensate for it. So anyway, take care there, Lisa. And while we all melt here in wherever we are, or the hideous floodings that's going on in the east, and you've got the terrible heat waves and fires that are going on in Europe, and the various other floods in China, that's helping to undermine their sense of superlativeness. Recuperating, didn't stay in hospital. Oh, good. Yeah. Okay. That's breaking back sounds very serious indeed. And that's the fact that you're recuperating well on that is keep at it. Relax, kids. So anyway, next week will be another installment of the Luskin list. As I said, we're presumably about a quarter of the way through it, because all we know is that there's supposedly 800 plus sources in it, and just how many beyond that, we'll find out. But I'll be very intrigued to see if any of the categories hit any more recent material, or if any of them in the subcategories, because the main blob is the kind of ALU retrotransposon thing. The vast majority of these papers will be going weeks and weeks and weeks before we ever bump into anything beyond that main list. Although I've tripped off several from some of the other columns, because I would be following up on the same author or same topic that was coming up sprinkled across in a separate area. But to see, are they going to bring up any fundamentally new things again anywhere within 100 miles of their primary argument, which is that the majority of junk DNA actually does something. And as we have documented, source by source, nope. All they've done is reinforce what Dan Stern-Cardinale indicated, which is that organisms have made use of and had to compensate for, to some extent or another, all these retrotransposons and viral things coming in, because otherwise they're dead. And so in the long run, because so many of them can be gooing things up. So the system has kludgy worked its way around compensating for them, and 15, maybe 20% ups as the boundary layer on functionality. That means 80% plus aren't. And nothing in that data field that we've encountered so far has changed that opinion. So we'll see. Don't hold your breath that we're going to find any smoking guns. It would be absolutely thrilling if it did. But it's also allowing us to burrow through things. And of course, every source that pops up that I don't already have in my main tip reference field gets plugged into that. So that is continuing the super a measurement of exactly how much of the scientific literature is getting noticed by anti-evolutionists, which is running into about the 25% range of my data field, which at the moment is something in the neighborhood of like 37,000 technical papers. And of that, they're misrepresenting big swaths of it and missing some areas entirely, reptile mammal transition, cognitive literature, things like that. So anyway, we're keeping at it. I don't know that anybody else is doing a scholarly analysis that's physically measuring something in quite that way. You get quite a few source methods people that are bumping into things like that. But the TIP project is my little personal hobby. That's a thing that nobody else has done before. And that is measuring at source level what all anti-evolutionists are offering as evidence. And this spills over the juicy part really would be the young earth creationists, because they're trampling on everything. So they would be dealing with stuff in history and genetics and cosmology and geology and paleontology in a different way than you would be finding in the little niche intelligent design movement, or the even more nichey old earth creationists who are practically a pimple on the back ass of things. So anyway, there, that keeps us up and keeps us going. I'll be really looking forward to having Rocks for There finished, and that way I can put my brain back to working on the rest of the third Paralogs of Fog novel. Stuck way up on the top to keep the other books in their location. I'll probably have to rearrange some things to have my shameless plug shelves once we get another book out there. But we'll do what we can, the way we can. And anyway, I'm busier and having more fun as a scholar than I've ever had in my life. And thanks to everybody out there that's paying attention and helping as you can through the Patreon and or buying the works and helping out. Let everybody know about the channel. Let everybody know about the project. And remember, it's all open access freebie. Big chunks of material. The core of an awful lot of the TIP argument is all available at my website. It's, even though it's older material relation to what I've got here, it's still an awful lot valiant. So everybody stay safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins wielding lasers, and we will be seeing you all next week with another Luskin show.